Good evening. My name is Eddie Parlati, and today I'd like to share with you what should be two public history assets regarding Benedict Arnold's raid on Richmond from January 1781. Instead of a traditional research paper, I developed two modules with an aim to share the history of the raid of Richmond to a broad general audience. The first of these modules is an interactive atlas which seeks to incorporate the historical narrative of the raid with the geography of the Tidewater and Richmond areas of Virginia. Seeing the British and Virginia forces engage one another on a very local level helped to illuminate the importance of the skirmishes and the consequences of the actions on both sides of the raid. The second module is a historical timeline. This application marries the chronological aspects of the raid with biographies of key players and their own personal narratives. The body of both of these works meshes together with hyperlinks to allow fluid movement between both modules, which allows for personal narratives to interplay with a local geographic experience. Before we move into the overview of both modules, I'd like to very briefly summarize the raid of Richmond and what it meant to both the British command and the Virginia leadership in 1781. In the last months of 1780, General Henry Clinton was looking for a point to strike at the American forces, and Arnold believed a swift military operation in the highlands of New York and the Chesapeake region would stretch the rebel army beyond its limits. Mobilizing about 2,000 British, Loyalist, and Hessian troops, General Arnold would sail into Hampton Roads in the last days of 1780, then up the James River at the dawn of 1781. On his way up the James River, he would attack fortifications, burn buildings, and loot plantation homes. Among these plantations was Mary Willingbird's Westover Plantation, where Arnold would set up his base of operations. Awaiting Arnold in Richmond was then Governor Thomas Jefferson and the beleaguered Virginia militia. Marching from Westover into the city of Richmond, the British were virtually unopposed. They destroyed public buildings and state records, burned down warehouses, but not before they took large quantities of rum and tobacco. Also, British troops under the command of Colonel John Graves Simcoe pillaged and destroyed the West Ham Foundry west of Richmond, dumping powder into the river and taking cannons as prize. The British quartered at St. John's Church on January 5th, then withdrew back down the James with their loot. Though these troops were harassed by Virginia militia during the entire raid, it wasn't until the British were moving away from the city did the Americans begin to develop any sort of defense. The British would arrive at Portsmouth in the middle of January, where they would set up a more permanent encampment. Rendering this historical narrative into engaging public history applications presented challenges. Therefore, I developed two different theses to ground my research in historical method while not compromising on the commitment to public history. As an academic historian, I took the stand that the raid of Richmond would open up Virginia, a main source of men, supplies, and ordnance, as another front in the Revolutionary War, and the raid would expose Virginia's defenses as vulnerable, which would ultimately be the catalyst that drove Cornwallis's forces in the South and Washington's forces in the North into Virginia. As a public historian, I wanted to produce tools to provide rich, accessible, provocative history of the raid of Richmond by utilizing an interactive historical atlas and a multimedia timeline working in unison to stitch individual people, places, and events into a cohesive narrative. The timeline's main purpose was to drive the historical narrative along using first-hand accounts, personal correspondence, journals, and contemporary periodicals. Each person, place, or event is given a tile, and each tile pushes the story along. I produced more than 30 tiles to articulate the narrative, focusing on key events and skirmishes along the James River. Of these 30 tiles, 10 are devoted to biographies of key players and their motivations during the raid of Richmond. British commanders such as General Benedict Arnold and Colonel John Graves Simcoe, Virginia leaders such as Governor Thomas Jefferson, Baron von Steuben, and General Thomas Nelson, and civilians caught in the middle such as plantation owner Mary Willingbird and enslaved African Isaac Jefferson. The atlas takes this same historical narrative but interprets it geographically with an emphasis on daily movement, encampments, and skirmishes. Each tile represents an event with geographic accuracy in mind. I took Jefferson's diary of Arnold's invasion and notes on subsequent events, von Elvin's Hessen journal, John Graves Simcoe's memoirs to build the raid of Richmond as a day-by-day basis while taking consideration to make it engaging, thought-provoking, and accessible to a general public. The applications I used in producing the timeline and atlas were created by Knight Labs from Northwestern University, which provides free and straightforward web-based solutions for education and journalism alike. Though there were some limitations in utilizing these tools that could easily have been my own experience, these are powerful applications for producing public history assets for all ages and historical interests. If you have any interest at all in public history, I urge you to check out these tools. I'll provide a link to their site in the discussion board. Thank you.